New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth, to live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge, on the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Growing Edge Live. I'm Allie Benjamin, and it is my great joy to be here today. We love to have conversations here on the Growing Edge with soul-centered individuals that are channeling their time, their talent, their energy, their creativity and resources into doing good work in the world. And so as you scroll through all of the different episodes of this podcast, of this show, you will find a wide range of individuals from all different walks of life. And we take a deep dive into who they are and how they landed up doing the work that they're doing in the world and how it is that they impact others. And today we have a wonderful guest that is back. This will be her second time on the show. I'm just so excited to introduce my teacher, my mentor, Linda Frazee. She has been training me to be an Enneagram teacher and coach, and I'm very excited to have her on. It was about a year ago that she was last here, and at that point we got to really know her story and how she came into the world of serving others and supporting others and understanding themselves and how to build lives of meaning and prosperity and joy and ease. And so we can continue on from there. So Linda, welcome.
Thank you, Allie. It's a pleasure to be back. And hasn't it been a fast year? Wow.
It has. It's been stunning because we're right here at the end of the course. And I've been taking a year-long training program with you, and I can't believe it's up. And all that I've learned with you and my classmates, and what an adventure it's been, a roller coaster of emotions, really, as I've got to really understand myself through the lens of the Enneagram. And there's still so much more to uncover, I know, and to really understand my family and my loved ones. And so thank you for being here again. And for those of you that didn't see the episode with Linda last time, I want to read her bio because she's amazing. Linda is an international workshop leader, professional life coach, and co-author of the book Full Heart, Satisfied Belly. She is a certified Enneagram teacher and has been using this personality system as a primary tool in her work with others for the last 25 years. Linda has over 40 years experience working with individuals, businesses, and the government to improve relationships and increase productivity. Her professional training is in transpersonal psychology and imagery. She has been in private practice in Colorado, Maryland, and currently in Scottsdale, Arizona. Her primary message is recognizing the importance of the connection between the mind, body, and emotions for satisfaction and success in every aspect of life. Linda. That's a beautiful purpose and mission, and I know that you're working with people all over the world to share some of the things that you've learned through your journey in business and in Enneagram and psychology. So where are you and how are you?
Well, it's always interesting to hear your introduction, and so it's like, oh yeah, that's right, that's what I do, because whatever we're doing on a regular basis just seems the natural thing. I mean, it's just what we're doing. So right now I'm in Denver, Colorado, here, actually in Lakewood, which is a suburb of Denver, at my daughter's house. And that's because I'm a snowbird and I live in Phoenix in the winter and Denver in the summer. That way I get the best of both worlds for the seasons, and I get to be with a lot of my family here in Colorado. So that's where I am, and we're getting ready, as Ali mentioned, for the graduation for the students that have been studying for a year. So there's still a lot of work to do. Some of them are almost finished. Some of them are lagging behind. So it's kind of an intense time. And my daughter Dr. Michelle Madrano, and I just did a big Enneagram workshop here at her church, Mile High Church, and we have a lot of people who are interested from that class in doing my next certification class. So there's lots of things afoot.
Oh, beautiful. Well, we'll have to catch up after the show on all of the details. That sounds amazing. So for those that maybe are hearing about the Enneagram for the first time, can you give us a sort of a little nutshell of the history of it and how it got to this continent?
Well, yes, a nutshell is important because it has a long history, probably 2,000 years old. And because we didn't have anybody as court reporters or cell phones or videos watching it, there's, of course, lots of debate about that. And different Enneagram schools tell the story a little differently about where the Enneagram came from. But I think that there's a general acceptance of the fact that it's ancient wisdom handed down through many different kinds of sects of religion. The Greek's Enneagram means a nine-pointed graph. It comes from the Greek word, and it's been handed down by many people a long time ago. Helen Palmer, who was one of my teachers from the West Coast, used to say that it was that somebody had a stick out in the desert and just drew the symbol on the sand many years ago, because of course there were no books, and it was handed down from one teacher to another. Lots of interesting people. Gurdjieff was probably the most famous, who embraced the Enneagram and worked with it, and he even invented dances, the whirling dervishes, that you may have all seen at one point in time, wearing these long white skirts and whirling was part of the dance of the Enneagram. They had actual movements for it. This is a long time ago. And so it eventually came to, through a number of means, but through one particular man who came, Chazo, came to the United States and started teaching it. And he taught it he was from Brazil, as I remember, and he taught it to my teacher, Helen Palmer, in her house, where she had a small group of people who came. And this is probably the 1960s, 1970s. And again, no books about it, nothing at this time, just a theory. And Helen was very interested in psychology, and she was doing psychic readings, and interestingly enough. And she wondered why people would get blocked she would teach them how to do it. And she was so thrilled with these students who seemed lots of potential. And what would happen is they eventually would come up with blocks. And so one of them might say, I just can't do it right. I don't know. I think it should have been, I thought I was on the right path. And then, I don't know, I just thought it was right. Another one said, well, I was doing really good and I just fell asleep. I don't know what happened. I just fell asleep. And another one said, well, I've got to tell you all about it, and would have a tendency to exaggerate what happened, a variety of things. So she was very puzzled about that. And so when she heard about the Enneagram, she was really taken by it, because she could see how the habitual patterns that we all have would get in the way from learning and what she was teaching. So she began to be one of the big developers of the Enneagram in the United States. And in addition, one person was in her class who was a Franciscan. I want to say nun. It was a man, so it wasn't. He wasn't a nun. Monk, yes, Monk. There, that's what we call the men. So he was so enthralled. He wrote all this down on the back of a piece of paper and disseminated it all across the United States to the Catholic Church. So actually, the Enneagram was probably taught the most in the Catholic Church for the first 20 years of its time, or 10 or 15 years here in this country. And the first book that was ever written was by a Catholic nun. So, but Helen continued, who was not going down that religious thread at all. She, with her friend David Daniels, who was also my professor, he was a psychiatrist and a teacher at Stanford. They together took all of these pieces and very carefully disseminated them, and were some of the ones who brought it to the United States in the biggest way. As we speak, there are several schools across the United States that teach the Enneagram. You can get a master's degree in the Enneagram now from regular colleges. Mm-hmm. And there's a school in Germany that's been teaching the Enneagram for 20 years. So it's a worldwide system.
Beautiful. And so that's history of the Enneagram. And so for those that are listening that are brand new to it, what is the Enneagram, and how can they make sense of it? Like, what's the first step in understanding the Enneagram?
Well, I think a good way to think of it is that it's sacred psychology. And so it was not invented by a mathematician and a psychologist in a lab trying to, on a computer, trying to figure out how to get the right person in the right job. Now, there is an element of that could be used that way, but that was not its development, and that's not its intention. It is helpful in a situation like that, but that isn't behind it. So what it is, most people think of it as a personality system. It's really much more than that. But it does have 9 types, and the theory of the Enneagram, which I subscribe to, is that we come with a genetic predisposition. That with all the study on genes now, we know that just like our hair color and the color of our eyes, that we're born with that. Now, that doesn't mean we can't dye our hair. It doesn't mean that one of my daughters was born with black hair and it turned red and then it eventually turned blonde by the time she was a year old. So it doesn't mean that that's it. That whatever we were genetic predisposition is, that we're stuck there. That's a misunderstanding, but there is an element of that. And what that element is habits and the way we think and hold our awareness. And because of neuroplasticity, we can change that. And through understanding, we can elevate it and expand it. So getting back to that. So we have, first of all, a genetic predisposition, and then that meets our family of origin. Those are the people who raised us. The more functional that system is, the better able we will function with this genetic predisposition, and possibly even begin to express our gifts, and we'll be encouraged to express our gifts as we grow and grow up. The more dysfunctional it is for any, and most families are like 90% of all families are dysfunctional in some way or not. So the more dysfunctional that is, then we have adaptive behavior. So the child who is adamant about getting their needs met will take a variety of ways of adjust their behavior in ways. And so we have, again, this core of this genetic predisposition. We have a child who's wanting to get their needs met. And then we have self-talk. And then we have all of the external sort of influences like churches and grandparents and, the neighbors down the street and the culture we live in and all of that. And those are all those factors that come together that when someone comes to see Allie or me and says, okay, what type am I on the Enneagram? We look at all of that. And more importantly, they look at it, because the Enneagram, the most significant difference between this study and many others, well, there's many differences, but this is a primary one, is the fact that the Enneagram looks at motivation, not behavior. So it's not what you do on a daily basis, why you do what you do. And one of the interesting things is my school of Enneagram teaching does not believe in taking tests. And so if you go online right now, you could find hundreds of tests that you could take to determine what your type is. Well, the reason we don't encourage tests to figure out which one of these 9 types of the Enneagram you most identify is because, first of all, most of us don't know our motivation. As Allie, you just said that you went through a lot of feelings about through this. We think we know our motivation. When I discovered the Enneagram, I was already teaching relationship workshops. I'd been in private practice. I'd done lots and lots of workshops myself. If anybody had asked me, I thought that I had it all together, except there were these pieces that were like jigsaw pieces that were missing. And I really didn't understand that. I was like, why did I do that? And so when I finally found it, it took me a long time to really find myself on it and get what was the underlying motivation throughout my life. So the Enneagram is a deep dive, a study to get into improving who you are in your life, about your expressions, about your desires, just knowing yourself. Just knowing yourself is probably the biggest advantage, I would say, about discovering it. But another factor, how it's different than others, it takes time and it takes work because you have to find your own time. You can have a typing interview like with Allie. Allie could do a typing interview with you and help you narrow the field of the 9 types. But ultimately, we encourage you to find your own type because it's an inside job. So that's a lot that I've said there. Obviously, I just push a button and I'm. So you want to ask me some questions or make some statements about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so wonderful to have you, my teacher, talking about all of this, because part of my homework has been to give a presentation of the Enneagram. And so I've been recording myself doing these presentations over the last couple of weeks. And I sent these videos, the recordings, to Linda for her to review. And this afternoon, we're going to go over that. But what's striking to me is like, oh my gosh, I forgot to mention that. Oh my gosh, I forgot to mention that. So I'm really learning a lot about the way I will be presenting the Enneagram in the future and giving a history on it. It's just such a interesting modality. It's such an interesting body of work. And so, yeah, it does take a while once you put your toe in the water, once you maybe have a typing interview and land on your leading type. That's not the end of the journey. That's like barely the beginning of the journey. And so maybe you could share a little bit about how it was for you when you first fully owned your type.
Well, I'll start even a little bit before that, because when I was first introduced to it, I was absolutely kind of against it in sort of a way, in one way or another, in the fact that I was a professional speaker at the time. I was on the national speaking circuit, and I was using the Myers-Briggs and the DISC and all those traditional kinds of personality assessments that I was using. And mostly all my work was in the government and in industry, in corporate America. So I'd be a keynote speaker or somebody like that, and then I would be hired by many people as an ongoing consultant. So when I first saw it, I thought, well, first of all, the first thing the mistake that came down the line for me about the Enneagram is I had some colleagues who were in my therapy office, and they came back from having heard Helen in California, Helen Palmer, and they told me what my type was. Well, I was irritated about that. I didn't know anything about the Enneagram, but I mean, they were sure that's who I was, and that was annoying as it was. Well, then when I read it, I thought, no, that's not me. They said I was a 3 on the Enneagram, which is a performer. Well, I am a performer, and I was a professional speaker, but that was my occupation. And I didn't agree with a lot of the things that they said that are typical for 3s. For instance, 3s like to be the best, and I don't want to be the best. I want to be good. But I knew it wasn't the best, was not my motivation. And so there were a lot of things there that didn't really work for me. So when I finally did decide to become certified, and that's a long story about that, because I did resist. The biggest thing, I'll touch on that, I didn't think I could teach it in business. And business was my income. That's how I was making a living. Because I thought as I began to really study it more, I realized it gave you so much information about the people that you were living and working with, that I thought, wow, this has to be a highly functional workplace, because do you want your boss to know that you could be a 2 and that you're going to be such a helper that you're very willing to work overtime with no pay, or that you'll clean up the office after the luncheon and that you're just all there? I thought this is really a setup unless you have really functional people. Now, partly my concern about that was because one of my topics that I was speaking on was dysfunctional families in the workplace, and how we brought that kind of dysfunction into the work and how it showed up. So I was concerned about the legitimacy of really bringing that to a work setting, for fear that it could be misused. So that was my concern. But I did study it, and I trained with some people unofficially before I got certified. And I began to see, okay, so this is my fear for people. This is because of my sense of authenticity, not knowing at the time that I was a 4 on the system. I still wasn't sure. I was looking at maybe a 2. I wondered if I was resisting the 3, the performer's the 3, the 2 is the helper. So anyway, I finally went to get certified, and there were 50 of us in that group, and I was the only one who didn't know for sure her type when I got there. And so, of course, that didn't help. And so Helen at first said, well, just sit on this panel. Panels are where you have people who know their types and they get interviewed. That's something that Allie's been learning to do, something now done for nearly 30 years. But at the time, I had never run a panel, and so I would sit on these panels of these types, of the ones I thought I could be, and to see what I identified and how the energy, how if I really gelled with that or not. And I wasn't getting it. I was like, no, I wasn't. I didn't know. And finally, Helen sat me down. She said, you have to make a decision after like 2 or 3 days. And I was like, ah. So I was confused. I was confronted. I felt different than everybody else. And so I just went to one of these to listen, and there was a 4 panel. I had never considered the 4 panel as one of my types, because the way it was written in those early books was that a 4 was just this dramatic, helpless, victimized person. And I never saw myself that way at all. So I sat and I listened, and there's more to the story about Enneagram than 9 types. There's actually 27 types, which is a very advanced concept, but it's called subtypes. And one of those subtypes was a woman who was speaking. I felt like I was like my cat Mittens. I felt like my whiskers were tweeting. and I had a full body resonation, and I knew that was my type. And so it made all the difference for me to understand that. Now, if you're somebody who's listening to this and you're going, oh my gosh, this sounds so complicated. Well, it is complicated, but you start at the beginning. So by the time I got to that workshop and finally heard that panel, let's see, that was probably 96, 97, and I'd been studying it since 86. So 10 years, I had been reading books, looking at things, and doing all of that. And it doesn't mean that if you're interested in this, it's going to take you 10 years. Maybe I was a slow learner. And we have a lot better books now, too. So that helps a lot, too. The information is much more refined. Had I read about a self-pres 4 at the time, I think I could have found myself right away. Mm-hmm. So that's how I found it. And it took me a while to get into business with it, even though I used it immediately in my practice. Ran panels and did workshops. But as far as taking it to business, it was a while before I stepped into that, because I was still concerned about the whole office or the whole group really taking it seriously. And since then, I have done a lot of work. Most of my work with the Enneagram has been in the judicial system and in corporate America.
Wow. So once you knew your type, and we can talk a little bit about you referenced the self-preservation. We can talk about that in a minute. But once you realized that you were a type 4, how did that impact? Like, how did that really settle with you? Because you did mention that there were some aspects of the type 4 that you didn't really jive with. So what is it that you did, and how did that impact you moving forward personally?
Well, the the sticking point, and the traditional Enneagram language is vice and virtue, but because I taught this so much in business, I changed the wording, means similar things, but not in those. That sort of is sort of a religious language that didn't work for me. So my sticking point was envy. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that I was feeling envious. I didn't know, and it's not jealousy. Jealousy is like, oh, you've got that, I want yours, or I want to take that away from you, or there's not enough of it. Envy is, wow, I thought mine was fine until I saw yours, and then mine just began to fade. Now, the difference with the Self-Pres 4 is that I will look at somebody and say, well, you have that good. I want that too. So I'll go out and I'll do what it takes to get there. I'll get the career. I'll do this. I'll make the money. I'll do whatever. So it's a whole different kind of approach, but it still is envy. And so that was astounding to me. I had a history of buying houses. By the time I found the Enneagram, I'd probably had 20 houses. I was doing flipping of houses before flipping of houses was a thing. And some of it was just pure envy. My poor children would say, oh, no, don't finish that room. Don't finish that room, because they knew as soon as I got one whole house decorated and finished that my eyes would turn and I'd say, oh, look, there's one over there. And it was usually another fixer-up that I could make it beautiful. And they were going to get stuck in the process of helping, which was true. So anyway, so I realized that that's what had been running me. I mean, a lot of people would do that in a variety of other ways, but that was what was for me. And another big thing for me was realizing that because the 4 is in the heart center, we'll talk a little bit about the centers in just a minute, that I had a lot of deep, deep feelings. And being connected to people was really important to me. In fact, that's why I got off the national speaking circuit, because I would have these, this was before internet and before, you could just, fax your feelings or, text or anything. I had these long lines that would come through because I was talking about spiritual and emotional things to the masses. And they would come through and say, oh, this has changed my life. I've never realized this is just an amazing thing. And now I can talk with my daughter or my son or whatever was their issue. And but then I never saw them again, because then I was off in the next city doing it again. And so I finally realized that my particular personality was one that I wanted to follow up with people. Since that time, I have long-term relationships with my clients. I mean, I have some people that I have known for 35 years. And, and because I do a different kind of coaching than the traditional psychological one, they're also my friends, and so it's a whole different element. And that's the connections that I wanted. And there's no way I was going to get those connections. At the time, I saw about 1,000 people a week in some circuit or another. And it was and all over the country. So that was another way that I couldn't quite figure out, why did I not like that? I mean, I thought, well, what's that about? So I would have said, oh yeah, I really like people. I'd like to be connected. But the depth of the connections that 4 need and want is so much more than just, being on the stage. Had I been a 3, that would have been just great. That would have been all I wanted. It was just kind of superficial, but that wasn't. I wanted more.
Yeah. Well, as you know, and maybe I am also a type 4, self-preservation type 4. So that's been an interesting connection. And it's just so wonderful to be learning from someone that probably has a deep insight into me and why I'm doing the things I do and why I get tripped up and triggered by particular things. But we're going to take a really short break, and we're going to be back to continue this conversation.
The New Thought Men's community proudly presents New Thought Men's Summit, Foundations, an online conference, September 22nd through 27th. Register today at www.newthoughtmens.community, featuring 22 New Thought speakers, ministers, and visionaries, sharing their wisdom of modern spiritual masculinity. New Thought Men's community, empowering wholeness, centered in spiritual living.
People of African Descent New Thought Group proudly presents Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village, Thursday, August 1st through Sunday, August 4th. some of our greatest keynote speakers, some of our finest musicians and vocalists, some of our amazing and experienced panelists, and some of our fabulous masterclass presenters will be there for you at Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village this summer. Regular registration ends June 30th, so don't delay. Register today at padntg.com. Sponsorship opportunities are available at padntg.com. Volunteer opportunities are available at padntg.com. Go there now, padntg.com. See you there.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
And we're back with my guest, Linda Frazee. And Linda, we were just talking about you discovering your type and how that impacted your life and your work, and the fact that you and I are both the same type, which is interesting. We also touched on the fact that there's other dimensions or layers of the Enneagram that are very helpful. Knowing our leading type is the first step. And then you mentioned the intelligence centers and the subtypes, you and I both, self-preservation. And then there's particular challenges that each type has, vices, and there's virtues or gifts that each type has. Maybe we can explore a little bit about the layers as someone starts to, study this and take it a little bit deeper.
That's great, Allie. And, it just dawned on me listening to your title, The Growing Edge. This is a perfect fit for the growing edge, because the Enneagram is that. Most human beings, by the time they're in midlife at least, have some idea of who they are. That's the consistency and perhaps even the patterns. That's much more knowledge. There's much more knowing now than there was when I was young. Because now there's Oprah Winfrey and there's things on TV and there's books and there's all kinds of things. So most people kind of have an idea of who they are. The Enneagram opens it up even more. So I'll just go over those briefly. There's 9 types. So there's the perfectionist type or the reformer. I think the reformer is a better word, because some people feel insulted by the fact that they might be considered a perfectionist, and some of them might be grateful, like, yes, that's who I am. So because they want to get it right, and they do it right. They're so good. They're detailed people. They if they're reading a book, they can find all the words that are misspelled and the things that aren't right, and they kind of look at life like that, and boy, do they get things done. They keep their word. If you're a 1 and you say you're going to be there at 2:00, boy, that they're going to be there early probably, or at least there on time for sure. So they add a lot to our whole world for a variety of reasons. And the motivation they're working with is to be really a good person and to not show their anger and to do it right. Now, they're black and white thinkers, so they think that there's a right way and a wrong way. And that might work handily if they're literally that the work they do for a living, but in relationships, that can be a problem. So they can be resentful because they can't figure out why other people aren't doing it the right way. And because they have a tendency to swallow their anger, because a good person wouldn't be angry, or a perfect person would certainly not be angry. So they can actually get very anxious at times, and we all can get anxious. But they have a habit of being anxious and worried. And if they feel they insulted someone or someone insulted them, they could lay awake all night worrying about it, or maybe even maybe weeks would keep chewing on that. Mm. So that's the 1. The 2 is the helper. This is the person who is going out and they scan immediately for anybody who needs help. It's just an automatic sort of response. And now they can abandon themselves. They can abandon their families. I don't mean abandon like leave them in the, leave them at home and run away. I mean, they instead of keeping their own agreements with their family, if somebody else needs help, it's very easy for them to turn their head and go toward them. A wonderful, wonderful trait. Many of our healthcare workers are twos. Anybody in a helping profession, doctors often are twos. They're not the only ones. Anybody could be a two. It doesn't have to mean that you would literally have that as an occupation, but it's a way of being. And of course, the motivation is if I'm loving and caring and I help others, then they'll love me, which of course is not always true because the two can overgive and then deplete themselves. And then they don't have as much to give to themselves or even meet their own needs. So that's their challenge. The three I've already talked a little bit about as a performer or achiever, and they're out there not necessarily on a stage. Many threes are, but it doesn't mean that they're literally in the theater arts. Whatever they're doing it at the very best. They want to be at the top of the heap. They want to be recognized for it. They love the applause that comes out. It just fills their heart. And the only problem is that they're so productive, and they're very much like the ones, and that they get things done. And they're not black and white thinkers, they're gray thinkers. So they see more the middle thing, and they will cut corners to get things done because it's efficiency that's really important for them. Well, however, they're so busy. They're so busy doing that they can also forget themselves in a very, the challenge is called deceit. It doesn't mean they're deceitful people. It means that they'll say, oh yes, I can do that. Yes, I'll volunteer for that. Okay, fine, I'll do that. And if you have a boss or a supervisor who's watching this, they may go over to them later and say, Mary, how many hours in a day do you think you have? Because in the moment, the deceit is, of course, I'm unlimited. I can do everything. And they can't, of course. And so they have to learn to pull themselves back and be realistic. I often say that I think threes, it's like they have holes in their feet, and the sand is the applause and the achievement, but until they learn to patch the holes in their feet, it comes out. So as soon as they've gotten the applause or whatever, they've got to do more because they've got to get more and more. And so the Enneagram shows them in a much more gentle way than perhaps I've even said here about how to recognize that and come back. The four we've talked about, the challenge is envy, but the four is very much an emotional person and is very tied to the other's emotions, feels other people's emotions, can read other people's emotions easily, and by the way, is considered to be the most intuitive on the whole Enneagram. And that doesn't mean that they are the only one who owns it, but they can. And the envy can get in the way of like overreacting, over dramatizing, all kinds of things like that for the four. The five is called the observer, and they are the ones who stand back and observe in any given business situation that I have. If you have a group sitting around the table for this discussion, there'll be one who's laid way back against the wall. If possible, they'll tilt the chair back. They want to be just listen, and they don't say much. They don't raise their hand in the meeting. They're just observing. And yet, if I want to find out the synopsis of what's going on or what was said, or if there's a disagreement about two people of what was said, I can say to this guy, hey, John, what do you see there? And John knows because John hasn't been talking. He's been observing, and he's like a sponge taking all of this in. So the observer is the one who tends to be afraid of what could happen. And so as a result, they study and they research, and they are very, very good experts in their field. They like to be experts, except that sometimes, because they tend to also be introverted, not always, but many of them are, they can get isolated in their heads, because their head is for them a very nice place to be. They have all these ideas, and they can bring all these thoughts in and learn new things, and it's so exciting and fun that why do they need people, And so isolation can be a problem for a 5, and they have to learn to branch out and spend time with people so that they can get the more human and touch aspect of things. The 6 is right there beside the 5, and I didn't mention the centers, but the centers, this is a mental type, the 5, 6, and 7 that I'll talk about next. I've already mentioned the 5. The 6 is right there beside the 5, and they are they're also afraid for their own safety because they're concerned about the worst case scenario. Most all little children who are 6s have been observing and watching out. They're very good planners, extremely good planners, because they're planning to avoid the worst case scenario or to walk around it, or if they plan well enough, possibly it won't happen. 6 who goes on vacation has all the hotels, all of them booked, and that might be more important in this day and age, but it didn't used to be. And they have all the things dotted and T's crossed and all of that. And the only thing is that if something like this that was planned doesn't work out, oh, wow, now they're quite upset, because it isn't just about the plan didn't work. It's like, I'm not safe, because I'm only safe if I can get the plan. And so, so that's a big problem for 6s. And the healing for them is learning that, of course, the reality in life is that things do change. Unfortunately, many things happen we never would have dreamed or planned about. And then next door to them is another head type or a mental type, was a 7. In this center, these people, the 5, 6, and 7, in this center of intelligence, we have 3 centers of intelligence. This is the head or mental or thinking center of intelligence, which is very highly prized in most countries and certainly in America. That we're supposed to be logical and be smart and be thinking, and we should put a lot of focus on that level of intelligence. The 7 is also a fearful type, but you'd never know it, because they're like Tigger the tiger of the Enneagram. They're bouncy, 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 fun, fun, fun. What's next? And looks really desirable. Most people who see the Enneagram want to be a 7, or will mistype as a 7, because that looks like would be the most fun one to be. However, the challenge for the 7 is that they're running away from pain. Anything that hurts, they will just turn their head and go in another direction, because that's a lot more fun. And they're very good at creating. They're also good planners, but planners more for fun, spontaneous, delightful, sense of humor. Again, like Tigger the tiger, bouncy, bouncy, bouncy. And yet on the other side that needs improvement is the ability to sit long enough and really be with our own pain and disappointments in life that, again, are inevitable. And then you get a really strong person on both sides. So most 7s have no idea that the reason that they have all these good ideas and travel so much is that they're avoiding pain. Then we have the 8, which is now we're going to go into another center of intelligence, which is the body center. And the body center is the instinct type. It's the, we all have instincts, but these people, if you think of a center of intelligence from the Enneagram, it's like a default system. So the ones that I've mentioned so far, the default is to go to their head, the 5, 6, and 7. The default system for the body center, which is the 1 that I've already talked about, and the 8, and the 9, is to instinctively behave. The 1 instinctively, the one I've already talked about, that reformer instinctively suppresses their anger, so they think no one can see it. It leaks out, and anybody who lives or works with a 1 knows when they're upset with them, but they may not own it. If you even say, well, I think you're a little irritated. Oh, no, I'm not irritated, but you can feel it. Okay, the 8 is the one who overuses anger, and because all of these are struggling with anger in one form or another in this center. And so in this center, the 8 explodes. Usually as a child, they had tantrums, may have gotten in fights and athletic fights, expressed their anger in various ways. And if they're lucky, perhaps in a team sport, they maybe have had a good coach that said, this isn't going to work. You can't do this, or you can't play. And so they begin to learn, hopefully, at either in high school or college, perhaps, that I have to ratchet this back. I have to pick my battles. And but they have very big, forceful energy, and they are out there in the world. There are people often ask which types are there the most of? There's actually supposedly fewer 8s than there are other types. However, I've never seen an international study yet, so I don't know that we know that unequivocally. But I would say that people are surprised to hear that because the eights show up. I mean, they're leaders. They're out there. They're telling people what to do. They're on television. They're all over the place. And so we imagine, well, the world must be filled with them, but there really aren't. There really aren't that many. I think that's probably accurate to say that maybe there are fewer of them than many other types. So their challenge is learning to be soft. That they're like they have soft. They're like a chocolate-covered cherry or something. The cherry's inside, and or a marshmallow inside. They're really soft, wonderful people, but they protect themselves from their innocence, which is the center of their being. And once you really get to know an 8 well, and they've learned not to be overly angry, they're your advocate for life. And the last but not least is a 9. They're also in this body center, and their instinct is not to have anger. They do just the opposite. So this is they're called peacemakers. They're very malleable. They're wonderful. Dogs and cats love 9s and babies. My deceased husband was a 9. And many times we went into people's houses where they had pets and the pets would never come out. And the pet would be on my husband's lap. And they'd be going, I can't believe, that dog never comes out. Or that cat, is usually hiding under the bed. And here these pets are all over him because they have a very harmonious, countenance. And that's true. However, sometimes they are so harmonious that they don't advocate for their own rights. And they don't stand up. They'll go along to get along is a common phrase we use for 9s because they're so afraid of conflict. And what they imagine as conflict wouldn't be much. Like, for instance, if they ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and they got a cheeseburger instead, they'll likely eat it anyway because they don't want to cause any problem. They don't want to bother the waitress. After all, she might be upset. So they'll just, eat that sandwich even though that's not what they ordered. So it goes deep. I mean, this is a foolish suggestion as how it shows up, and it's very common. But in a relationship, it takes a lot of trust for them to finally talk about things that they're not happy with, so that you can have a healthy relationship.
Wow, that's a lot. I notice in the comments someone says, "Can your Enneagram type change over time?"
Yes, that's a very common question. Generally, the theory is no, that we have that genetic predisposition that doesn't change. However, we can grow in it. And so we can grow and develop. And that's the type we lead with. You've used that term correctly, Allie. I was pleased to hear you say that. We lead with a certain type. That doesn't mean we are. I don't like people to say, I am a 4, I am a 2, I am, because we're taking on an identity, and we're not clones, because we've all had our unique different experiences along the way. And so, but back to this question. In reality, again, this is more complicated, but still it bears repeating, or it bears mentioning. We lead with one number, and then we have a relationship to 4 others. So we're a combination of basically 5 numbers altogether. So like Allie and I, as a 4, we have a 3 on one side and a 5 on the other. So we have an observer on one side of us, and we have this performer on the other. So, and the way I like to describe that's called wings. My first Enneagram teacher was a nun, and she said that it's just like a bird. If you only have one wing and you try to fly, you're not going to fly very well. So it's ideal to develop those other 2 parts. Now, the way I like to teach it is that most people are living on a little baseball diamond, the size of that. That's where they live. And some people are born, live, and die, and they never get off of it. Those are the people who say, I am who I am, who I am, and I'll never change. And by gosh, they don't. But if you're interested in growth and the growing edge, your growing edge, just like what Allie's title is, you can consciously understand what these 2 wings are and develop those consciously, which is a wonderful sort of, it's like money in the bank. I always say it's like money. It's a resource that you had in the bank you didn't even know you had. Now you live your life not just from this little baseball diamond, but you have expanded yourself. So you have a lot more flexibility in your everyday reality. So that's an important path. And then go ahead.
Yeah. So I know we're coming up to the end of the show, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so much more I want to talk about. You mentioned intuition, and that is, it's said that the fours can be very intuitive. That doesn't mean that everyone else isn't, but it's wonderful just to sort of sink into that. So let's talk about intuition and the Enneagram, and how's it played out for you, and how have you seen it played out for other types? Or
but that's going to be a fast discussion with our time that's left. So I would say, I think all of us are born with the possibility of intuition, and some of us, because of our heritage and our circumstances, are then more willing to express it from the time we were young. And I had a family where that was encouraged, so that helped me. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the types of the Enneagram very quickly, and about how they express or how they don't intuition. So the performer that I mentioned, who tends to suppress their anger, has a tendency to worry and want words, thoughts, and actions to add up, and they can get caught up in that doesn't make sense. And so when things happen that aren't logical, that don't have a straight path, it doesn't make sense. And intuition jumps. Intuition is the meaning of intuition is interesting. And I actually looked it up. The innate ability to know something without having to consciously think about it or know about it. That's what it is. And so if you're a 1 and you're thinking, this does not make sense, that's going to get in the way. So they have to learn to overlook that possibility so they can experience it. And 2s can be so focused on everybody else that the intuition that they may feeling, sometimes called a gut feeling. So people sometimes feel and that's probably the most common way that anybody in business thinks about it, is follow your gut or your gut feeling. And if you're a body type like a 1, a 9, or an 8, that really works. But the rest of us have gut feelings too. And so they may miss that while they're busy with their up and out eyes looking to see somebody else. So in the meantime, they might be getting messages from their gut and they think it's indigestion, so they miss their intuition. And the 3s are so busy, they're achieving and doing it, that then they're probably using their intuition a lot, because it gets them from where they're going, and they want to make sure they got all the things they need, and they're just buzzing around, but they forget to even notice it or even give it much credit. So in order to really get into it and really take a good account of it, they have to slow down. The 4, as I said, is the one that's considered the most intuitive on the Enneagram, because we are so about connections. So we feel the energy, our own emotions, and we feel others as well. However, if we overdo it and we don't take proper care of ourselves and our own personal needs, then intuition can dwindle, and that unbalanced energy can move into drama. The quiet observer that I talked about has a great capacity for being intuitive, especially if they've developed their 4 wing. But they can get caught up into research and validate it to make sure, is this really valid? Is this true? What are the statistics about it? And can this be perceived and proved factually? So, when that happens, they kind of step out of their self. And I'll tell a brief story. I had my first husband was a 5 on the Enneagram. We didn't know the Enneagram in those days, but he was. And what happened was he had an incident where he almost was hit by a car while he was driving his car, and intuitively he jumped the curb to save himself. Mm-hmm. And when he told me the story, we knew that was true. I mean, he was, but by the time he slept on it, he changed the story. And then years later, if I asked him about it, he said it never happened, because it didn't make sense. It couldn't be. So that's something that a 5 or a 6 has to worry about. And the type the 6 has to battle the need to search and find what is dangerous in order to be prepared and safe, because doubt can cloud an experience and block the flow of intuition. So they have to really be able to let go and trust in order to get that. We still have a few more minutes, Allie?
Oh yeah, we've got another 5 minutes. So
okay. The 7, in order to notice and experience and accept one's intuition, you have to be present. You have to be in the present moment. You can't do it. You might remember it later and you might anticipate it, but in order to really feel it and act on it, you have to be present. And that's where Tigger the Tiger, the number 7, has the most difficulty, is just being in that moment. They're called the adventurer. And as I said, I call them Tigger the Tiger because they could miss the intuitive experience altogether. And so I actually, one of the homework pieces I always give them is to write it down and to keep a journal. And that would be good for all of us. And because when you write it down, you don't, even if you do forget it, you have something to look back and read. The 8, the challenger, which is the one with the big energy, probably uses their intuition frequently, but may not give them give it any credit, because they will say they're good at reading people, and that they have good decisions. They make good decisions. And so that's good if they're doing that, but they don't give it credit that's a lot about intuition, because they are very intense, and they can just read people right away, especially if somebody's afraid of them. Never going to work. An 8 will actually provoke an argument with a friend to see if they'll stand up to them, because they don't respect anybody that doesn't stand up to them. So it's very interesting. The 9 is a natural. Because of their pace and their natural flow, they are also very highly it's very likely that they will have a lot of good intuition. However, they have a natural flow of being in the right place at the right time with the right people. And that's likely because they're so likable. People just like them. So, they're welcomed wherever they go, and they have an inner compass. And when it's turned on clearly to the next best experience, they can just flow with ease. However, they tend to go to sleep. They tend to go to sleep on their own right action. And when they do that, their intuition can go to sleep with them. So that's a lot in a short period of time. I apologize. I hope you have your volume up. You may have to listen to that a couple of times, or go to our websites and look at the websites and read up on it, think about it, look at the many books that are available. So
yeah. So Linda, I know for me, my intuition is just so woven into the way I connect and communicate with others that I just have a sense of what needs to be said next, or the question, and so I love hearing about how each of the types either block their intuition or how they can really lean more into their intuition. Now, we're about to jump off. I know that you've got a new course coming up. How can people learn about the Enneagram and the course that you have coming up? It's to train individuals to become teachers, correct? How can they find out?
They can go to my website, lindafrazee.com, or they can send me an email, lindafrazee11@gmail.com. That's Linda Frazee, FRAZEE 11 @gmail.com. And this is for people who generally, if the ideal thing would be you already have some understanding of the Enneagram. And then if you're not, this new course starts in January. It's the last one I'm going to do to certify people to teach. So it will be January of 25 to January of 26. And they can fill out an application and have an interview with me, and that would be a good place to start.
Beautiful. Thank you, Linda. I love you. I appreciate you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. And thank you to our audience. We'll be back next week with my friend Marty Barker. And thank you to New Thought Media Network for producing our show, and to the Satya Center for sponsoring it. And if you would like to connect with us at the Satya Center, if you'd like to know more about what I'm doing, being on this show, give us an email at thesatyacenter@gmail.com. So thanks a lot. See you next week. Mwah. Peace and blessings. Lots of love to you wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth, to live a conscious life, on the growing edge.